want to dive a little bit more into detail. I'm big on pricing for hospitals. I'm big on accounting for hospitals, what makes me pretty much the least popular guy in a hospital and only less popular at dinner parties. So how did you handle the issue of the differences in accounting practices across all these different governmental agencies, departments, and functions?
It's a great question. So at the state level, we figured out that the chart of accounts was generally uniform across different state agencies. But once we started doing it with the cities, counties, and schools, Todd, it was a total mess. I think we identified over 300 different accounting systems, and it just became a mess. And so through the state auditor's office and partnership with the then state auditor, who was really helpful in this endeavor, we were able to identify a significant amount of local governments that use what was called the Uniform Accounting Network. But then the others that did not use that Uniform Accounting Network, they were just on all these different random systems. And so it took quite a bit of time and manual labor to essentially build technology that would talk and where it would make system A talk to system B and system D talk to system G and so on and so forth. It was very difficult. And so you just need smart people and engineers and a good technology department to do it, because I can imagine that, a hospital at SMU is different than the hospital at Baylor, and the hospital at Baylor is different than the hospital at University of Texas Austin. The one at Texas Austin is different than a private hospital down in McAllen on the border, which is different than a private one out of Midland. And so, I'm sure even within the public university hospitals in Texas, you probably have a ton of different fiscal systems. And then once you get into the private hospital systems there, it's probably even more fragmented. And so you really need talented engineers and software developers who can make the various systems talk to each other.
Well, on the one hand, we have the interoperability problem, which is, does one ERP system talk to another? We also have the issue with medical records and electronic health records not being interoperable, with the APIs not working. But I'm talking about something different, which is just getting the accounting practices, to be homogenous. For example, I have a friend of mine who told me that when he was the CEO of a hospital, one of the insurance companies was giving him a hard time about charging $1 for a tablet of aspirin. And the insurance guy says, hey, look, everybody knows that insurance doesn't ever pay $1 for an aspirin. An aspirin doesn't even cost a nickel. And so the guy says, okay, I'll charge you a nickel for the aspirin, but I'm going to charge you $7.50 for every aspirin to be distributed to the patient.
Wow.
So the price went from $1 to $7.55. And the insurance guy said, okay, that's fine, no problem. Now that's anecdotal.
Right there, that's an anecdote that just illustrates one of the many problems with healthcare in America today. Wow.
Well, and it gets worse because what insurance companies do is they pay a percentage of what's called gross billed charges by the hospital. So what that encourages the hospitals to do is to load everything up they can into the bill, and to cause that bill to be as big as possible, because 42% or 50% of that bill, if the bill's bigger, obviously that makes the amount that you're collecting bigger. It also correlates then to insurance companies, because the more that those costs go up, then that affects the amounts that they go back to the state departments of insurance to get their premiums adjusted for. They say, look, our costs have gone up, and it's basically a cost plus model. Oversimplifying it, but that's really the idea. And so as your EBITDA goes up, right, your profits go up, or cash flow, I should say, they go up. The compensation of the CEO goes up, right? Because you've got options that are based on the multiple of the EBITDA. So the whole incentive system is structurally challenged, and it's causing this massive inflation in the cost of healthcare for the entire nation. So what I'm questioning is, hey, can we use something like what you've done, and for any hospital that's taking government dollars, whether it's Medicaid or Medicare or TRICARE or some other form of governmental payment source, can we take your idea around ohiocheckbook.com and call it something different? Let's call it healthcheckbook.com or healthcarecheckbook.com, and have an ability to dial into virtually any cost incurred or paid for by virtually any hospital that's taking governmental dollars. And it's a controversial idea, but give me your first reaction. I'm not trying to sell you on it. I'm just genuinely inquiring. What we do here is we try and really develop ideas. There's not a good or an objective truth here. It's just, hey, does this idea make any sense?
Well, I think it would be controversial with the healthcare systems because it would shine sunlight on the way they operate and charge. But I don't think it would be controversial with patients. I think patients would love it. I'm a big believer, in the old Brandeis quote that sunlight is said to be the best disinfectants to government waste, or in this case, healthcare waste, and there's a ton of it. And so, listen, in this case, I think you should run to the controversy, and that the controversy, it's only controversial with healthcare executives, but I think patients would welcome it. I also think that net in the long term, it could transform our healthcare system in America because it'll really educate patients to make decisions on procedures before they go and have them. Because if you did this on the front end, if you actually had sunlight on the front end, not just on the back end, and a patient knew that, say, for instance, the MRI down the road was $500, whereas at the big system they're sending them to, it's $5,000 or $2,500, they go to the one down the road for $500. And I think there's a lot of that goes on, but patients just can't see it. And so I would encourage you, Todd, to have this type of transparency not just on the back end, but on the front end as well, so patients proactively can vote with their feet.
Well, I think you're spot on there in that accounting transparency and transparency of pricing leads to transparency of pricing. Transparency of pricing then leads to competition, and competition leads to lower cost. Actually, one of the things that I got interviewed about this morning was on the question of whether or not this current stimulus bill is going to lower the cost of healthcare. And I said, no, all it does is gives you money to pay your healthcare insurance with, but there's no correlation whatsoever between the cost of healthcare and the price of healthcare, and there's also no correlation between the price of healthcare and necessarily insurance. So what happens is people have money to pay for their insurance, but it's become a layaway plan for healthcare as opposed to protection against financial calamity arising out of a healthcare problem. So I think your point is well taken, which is we start with accounting homogeneity and transparency that leads to pricing transparency that leads to competition. That actually leads to a reduction in the cost of healthcare.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of commonalities between what we did here in Ohio with OhioCheckbook.com and the spending and what you're talking about on healthcare. And I'm not saying the portals will be apples to apples, but I think there's probably a lot of what we did that you can take and apply here in the healthcare system. And again, I just think it'd be welcomed. Listen, I'm a conservative. I'm a constitutional conservative. The liberal media definitely does not like me, and I wear that as a badge of honor. But I will tell you, they saw this as a great tool in their tool belt to try to hold politicians accountable, and we welcome that. And I actually think that journalists that cover healthcare can really be allies in this, because to be sure, Todd, you're going to have a lot of pushback from the healthcare systems and the executives. And I think, you can sort of leverage the media and the sunlight dynamic of this to ask the question, what do you have to hide? If you're honest about what you're doing and proud of how you're doing it, you shouldn't have anything to hide.